All right, baby murder. Let's talk about it. You might be surprised to find out that the discussion of abortion is not a new one. In fact, it's been going on for thousands of years. As it's said in the book of Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. And I'm going to prove it to you with respect to abortion with the following quotes. Now, this one is from the earliest known Christian document called the Didache, or the Teachings of the Apostles as it's also called, which is even older than the New Testament Bible that we're familiar with today. It is a first century document, and it's sort of an instruction manual for how Christians ought to behave themselves and live in the world. And in the Didache it says, "Thou shalt not murder a child by abortion, nor kill a child at birth." That was written nearly 2,000 years ago. And here's another quote from a Christian apologist, this one coming from the 2nd century. His name is Tertullian. He wrote, "In our case, a murder being once for all forbidden, we may not destroy even the fetus in the womb, while as yet the human being derives blood from the other parts of the body for its sustenance. To hinder a birth is merely a speedier killing of a man. Nor does it matter whether you take away a life that is born or destroy one that is coming to birth. That is, a man which is going to be one, you have the fruit already in its seed." And just to draw some more parallels to today, he even talks about the surgical tools used in abortions back then. So again, almost 2,000 years ago. Among surgeons' tools, there is a certain instrument which is formed with a nicely adjusted flexible frame for opening the uterus, first of all, and keeping it open. It is further furnished with an annular blade by means of which the limbs of the child within the womb are dissected with anxious but unfaltering care. Its last appendage being a blunted or covered hook, wherewith the entire fetus is extracted by a violent delivery. The doctors who performed abortions all knew well enough that a living being had been conceived, and they pitied this most luckless infant state, which had first to be put to death to escape being tortured alive. In the 4th century, St. Basil the Great was a bishop who served in a city in the modern-day country of Turkey. He wrote letters to his protege answering him on questions that he had on particular topics, one of which was abortion. St. Basil had this to say: "A woman who purposely destroys her unborn child is guilty of murder. With us, there is no technical discussion of whether it is or is not fully formed." That was written more than 1,600 years ago. And a contemporary of St. Basil the Great, St. John Chrysostom, he wrote the following in the 4th century. Here he is speaking directly to men who have sex with prostitutes or commit adultery and encourage or force the woman to get an abortion. "Why so? Where the ground makes it its care to destroy the fruit, where there are many efforts at abortion, where there is murder before the birth. For even the harlot you do not let continue a mere harlot, but make her a murderess also. You see how drunkenness leads to prostitution, and prostitution to adultery, adultery to murder, or rather to a something even worse than murder. For I have no name to give it, since it does not take off the living thing born, but prevents its being born. Why then do thou abuse the gift of God and fight with his laws, and follow after what is a curse as if it's a blessing, and make the chamber of procreation a chamber for murder?" And for those familiar with church history, we have a canon from the 7th century from a council that states, "As for women who furnish drugs for the purpose of procuring abortion, and those who take fetus-killing poisons, they are made subject to the penalty prescribed for murderers." There's so much more to reference, but I think you get the point. This is not a new discussion. Christianity has always believed that life begins at conception, and that abortion is murder, viewing each and every human life as sacred and of value, which was in very stark contrast to the rest of the pre-Christian pagan world, who saw human life as cheap and disposable, which we'll get to later in this video. So you may have heard talk about the UK Parliament voting on decriminalizing full-term abortions. That is, aborting a baby in the womb up until birth. That means if a woman kills her baby in the womb before birth, up until the point of birth, she cannot be criminally charged. Now, this isn't about the politics, which are really irrelevant to me. What I want to discuss is what's happening here spiritually. What is the cosmic spiritual battle being played out under the guise of this abortion discussion? But first, it's very important to use the right terminology here, as language is the foundation for any narrative or discussion. It's the common ground that allows communication and consensus to happen, which is why the evil one and those manipulated by evil are always trying to control narratives using clever wordplay. Now, we don't mince words on this channel. I really don't like the word abortion when referring to the deliberate ending of a child's life in the womb. It's a very sterile and technical word. I mean, there's no life in it. And I think that's why the pro-choicers love that word, because it removes any humanity out of the discussion. They want to use this lifeless and sterile word in order to hoodwink you and mask the fact that we're discussing killing and murdering babies in the womb. The right word to use is prolicide, which I think is much more gruesome and fitting. The side part of that word is Latin, which means the act of killing. So for example, homicide, homo in Latin refers to man, side to killing, so homicide is the killing of a man. Sui, S-U-I, in Latin refers to oneself, so suicide is the killing of oneself. And prolicide, prole refers to offspring, so prolicide is the killing of offspring. Now this is the right word we should all be using because it calls it what it is. It is the deliberate murdering of offspring. It's a better word to use than abortion because it takes out any kind of room to have this made-up discussion about when life begins. Because it doesn't matter whether we're talking about conception, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. At any point that you kill a embryo, a fetus, a baby, or child, it's prolicide. It's the killing of your offspring. Once an egg is fertilized with sperm, it now has a new genetic code that differs from the mother's. That's why that "my body, my choice" phrase has always been complete nonsense. The fertilized egg is not your body. It has different DNA from the rest of your body. It's a separate entity. It is your offspring. So I'll be using the word prolicide instead of abortion for the rest of this video in this discussion. Now the prolicide discussion has always been a slippery slope, as pro-lifers have been saying since the very beginning. And the pro-choicers pretend that there is no slippery slope as we literally slide down that slope into full-term abortion. You know, the devil absolutely loves slippery slopes because it starts off with us entertaining the idea that you can legally destroy an embryo because it's not a life or just a clump of cells, right? And the next thing you know, in the US, we're legalizing the killing of a first trimester baby with Roe v. Wade. And now the UK is voting to decriminalize prolicide up until the point of birth. Now the fact checkers are already saying that, oh, everyone online is over-exaggerating, they're overreacting, this is not legalizing full-term prolicide, it's only decriminalization. But we know, because we're not idiots, that it first starts with decriminalization and then it becomes more and more accepted to the point of legalization. We're not fools. It's only a matter of time. And once prolicide up until the point of birth is legalized, more accepted, more common, then what's the next step after that? The next step is to then decriminalize and legalize the killing of a child after birth. Now, you might think I'm crazy to believe that's what's happening, but let me tell you why that's exactly what's going to happen. Infanticide, the murder of infants, was a pretty prolific common practice in the majority of human history up until the point of the flourishing of Christianity. In ancient times and in many pagan cultures across the world, the discarding of unwanted babies was a very common practice and in some cases legal. Now it could be for any reason. It could be because the baby was deformed or sickly or was the wrong sex, as in if they were hoping for a boy and they got a girl, or they just decided for whatever reason not to raise it. For example, in ancient Greece, the famous Aristotle said, "As to exposing or rearing the children born, let there be a law that no deformed child shall be reared." In Rome, the 1st century Stoic Seneca wrote, "We doom scabby sheep to the knife, lest they should infect our flocks. We destroyed monstrous births, and we also drown our children if they are born weakly or unnaturally formed. To separate what is useless from what is sound is an act, not of anger, but of reason." In fact, infanticide was part of Roman law, under the laws of the 12 tables. Under table 4 it says, "A dreadfully deformed child shall be quickly killed." And infanticide wasn't just utilitarian. I mean, there were so many examples of religious child sacrifice that pagan cultures participated across the planet. Now, because of the Christian belief in the sanctity of life, many early Christians attempted to rescue these poor babies that were left out in the wilderness, or in many cases in trash and dung heaps for the weather or for predators to take their life. As we heard from early Christian writers in the beginning of this video, Christianity viewed life in a radically different way than the rest of the pagan world did. And centuries of persecution and martyrdom of the early Christians by the pagans is actually what spread Christianity like wildfire. Now that was due in large part because the pagans were so shocked to see how Christians embraced torture and martyrdom with joy, with smiles on their faces in many cases, with the joy of being united with Christ. It was so radically different to their view of the world that they knew there was something to it, and so it converted many pagans that way. In any case, the Christian ethic and worldview inevitably began to outwin the pagan worldview, as demonstrated by the eventual outlawing of abortion and infanticide. After the rule of St. Constantine, the 4th century Roman emperor who ended the persecution of Christians, infanticide and abortion became a more widely condemned practice, and the customs and practices of the pagan world that had dominated for thousands of years were defeated and declared not just immoral, but illegal. So where does that take us today? Well, the modern changes in law surrounding abortion practices are simply a symptom indicating the return of paganism, which should come to no surprise to anyone who's been observing the degradation of culture in the West. As the Western world continues to abandon the Christian values that have been its cultural, moral, and legal foundation for 1,000 years, it's only logical that society would slip back into paganism in response to its rejection of Christian values. This is history repeating itself yet again by a society that doesn't understand history or the spiritual world. And the solution to it is obvious. It all boils down to an individual choice that each one of us must make. Do we abandon the love and salvation offered by Christ and once again embrace the demonic gods of paganism, reverting back to a culture of death that has no qualms in murdering children or the innocent, reverting back to a culture of death that has no qualms with murdering babies or children? Or do we cling to Christ even harder, struggling towards love and light and life with the fullness of our strength, embracing the difficult but righteous path that leads to life? To which I ask, which way, Western man and woman? That's it for me today. I hope you liked the video. Please like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.